This is Episode 1, Prologue. Welcome to the Cathedral of Silence. Welcome to Ancient Secrets and Haunted Journeys. Today, we're opening the file on Eastern State Penitentiary, a place built from certainty. Certainty that silence could fix a person. Certainty that architecture could reshape a conscience. Eastern State admitted its first prisoner in 1829. While construction was still continuing. It was originally known as Cherry Hill, built on farmland outside the city, and it would become one of the most influential prison designs on Earth. Here's the detail that always snaps this story into focus for me. In 1829, even the White House had no running water, and yet Eastern State was engineered with systems that required water and heat to function, because the entire concept depended on keeping people alone, indoors, for long periods of time. This was not a dungeon accidentally discovered. This was a machine deliberately built. In the next few minutes, I want you to understand 3 things. First, who imagined this place and why. Second, how the building itself enforced the philosophy. And third, how fast the good intentions collided with reality. Because Eastern State isn't only a historic prison, it's a template. And the echoes of that template still show up in modern debates about solitary confinement, punishment, rehabilitation, and what society thinks a human being deserves. To understand Eastern State, we have to start before the walls existed. In 1787, a group of notable Philadelphians formed the Philadelphia Society for Alleviating the Miseries of Public Prisons. Benjamin Franklin and Dr. Benjamin Rush were among the founders. Their goal was reform. They were responding to harsh conditions and brutal punishments that were common in jails of the era, and they believed people could change. By 1821, at the urging of that society, Pennsylvania's legislature approved funding for a radical experiment, a new kind of prison designed to encourage penitence through solitary confinement with labor. That core idea became known as the Pennsylvania system. The architect chosen was John Haviland, British-trained, and tasked with building something that had barely existed before, a large-scale prison designed around total separation. Haviland's plan was radial, a hub-and-spoke layout. 7 cell blocks radiated out from a central hub like spokes of a wheel. The design wasn't just dramatic, it was functional. Haviland promoted it for watching, convenience, economy, and ventilation. And Eastern State wanted to be seen in both senses of the word. Its medieval Gothic facade was meant to intimidate. But inside, the space was intentionally church-like, meant to produce reverence and quiet. High arches, skylights, a solemn hush baked into the structure. The building wasn't neutral. It was a message. And that message was this: you will be alone here, and you will become someone else. Now let's get concrete. What did Pennsylvania system actually mean inside these walls? At its core, separate confinement. Isolation as the method, not the side effect. For much of the period between 1829 and 1913, the system aimed to keep prisoners completely alone, not allowed to speak to or see other inmates. In practice, that often meant spending 23 hours a day inside a cell with a brief period alone in an individual exercise yard. Each cell was roughly 8 by 12 feet, with a bed, a workbench, and a cast iron toilet that was flushed with water once a day. The cell had a skylight, sometimes called the dead eye, and the space was designed to feel almost chapel-like when new. Each cell also connected to a private exercise yard through a back door, slightly larger than the cell, but open to the sky. Here's a wild architectural detail. Originally, there was no door from the main corridor into the cell. Food was passed through a small opening, a feeding hole. The primary entry was from the exercise yard side. In the 1850s, doors lining the corridor were added. The prison also tried to enforce silence mechanically. 20 inches of masonry separated each cell. Guards muffled their footsteps by wearing wool socks over their shoes. But silence wasn't only built, it was enforced. The warden's records include punishments for breaking the rule of silence, including time in dark cells, bread and water diets, and restraints. This is where the philosophy hardens into reality. When the entire system depends on silence, then speech becomes a crime. Supporters called it humane. Critics called it psychological destruction, and that argument exploded early. In 1833, a major public scandal erupted after prisoner Matthias Macumsey died following punishment with an instrument known as the iron gag, used to prevent talking. Accounts describe it as fitting over the tongue and connecting to the prisoner's arms pinned behind the back, so movement could cause pain. An investigation followed. Administrators were exonerated, but the prison's reputation took a serious hit. This matters because it shows something important. Even while Eastern State was being marketed as the enlightened alternative to older punishments, the institution still used severe discipline when the system broke, and the system did break. It was expensive and cumbersome. Isolation required infrastructure, heat, plumbing, individual yards, individual supervision. Meanwhile, another model was competing for dominance, the Auburn or New York system, where prisoners worked together in silent, factory-style workshops by day and returned to isolation at night. That model was cheaper and far more financially self-sustaining. So Eastern State stood at the center of a national argument. Is solitary reflection the path to reform, or is it a slow kind of torture? One of the most famous critics answered that question in blunt language. In 1842, Charles Dickens visited Eastern State and condemned the practice of rigid solitary confinement, calling it cruel and wrong, and warning that it tampered with the mind in a way that could be worse than physical torture. So by the 1840s, the warning lights were already flashing. The theory sounded moral. The lived experience could be brutal. And here's where our season arc starts to lock into place. Eastern State's Pennsylvania system was officially abandoned in 1913, but it had been eroding for decades. Overcrowding pushed the prison to compromise. Cells designed for one person began to hold two. Spaces intended for isolation began to fill with noise and movement. At one point, the building was originally designed to incarcerate about 250 people, but the population eventually peaked at approximately 1,700 in the mid-1920s. Construction continued over its operational lifetime. What began as 7 radial cell blocks expanded dramatically, reaching 15 cell blocks by 1956. By the 20th century, Eastern State had become something different from its original idea. It was a maximum security facility with inmates serving long sentences, including life sentences. And the prison's famous isolation had shifted in meaning. What began as philosophy increasingly became punishment. That's where places like The Hole, also called Klondike, enter the record, described as punishment cells with low ceilings and no plumbing. In the 20th century, isolation at Eastern State wasn't framed as moral reform. It was discipline. Eastern State ceased operation in 1970, and after being used briefly as a city jail in 1971, it stood empty for years. It avoided demolition, stabilized as a ruin, and opened to the public for tours in the 1990s. So yes, it's a haunted place in the cultural imagination. But the real haunting is historical. This is a site built on the belief that you can engineer repentance by removing human contact. Next episode, we're going deeper into the vision and the fortress itself. Who the reformers were, why they believed solitude could save a person, and why the building's design became one of the most copied prison layouts in the world. Until then, keep one thought with you. Eastern State didn't only lock people up, it exported an idea. Thanks for listening to Ancient Secrets and Haunted Journeys, hosted by Jessica, written by Jessica and Daniel Fafel, produced by Jessica Fafel, research, music, and artwork by Daniel Fafel. For sources and photos, check the show notes. Come back next week for the next episode. And for the full deep dive, the book Eastern State Penitentiary, the Pennsylvania System and the Prison That Changed the World is available now on Amazon.